You're listening to Parasearch Radio, news, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio. Parasearch Radio, broadcasting to the UK and beyond.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Haunted Histories with your host Penny G. Morgan, right here on Parasearch Radio.
And a very good evening to all of you tonight here, Haunted Histories with yours truly, Penny G. Morgan, on the one and the only Parasearch Radio. Hope a load of you were listening to Sean and the lovely Mr. Postlethwaite. I'm sorry, Michael. Sorry, I haven't got my teeth in yet. Just before this show, they were talking about equipment and sometimes going back to the basics is the best, but nobody seemed to pick up on my suggestion that we should use Betamax video cameras still. Maybe I'm the only one that finds that funny. But anyway, it was a great show. Hope you all enjoyed that one. I know I did. Anyone who's interested, I did my 6.5 mile 10k run for Dementia UK in Brighton this weekend. Yes, that is a very smug face I have on. I finished it. I wasn't last. And I actually got a personal best for the first mile out that I did. So, yes, happy Penny. Penny still got a bit sore legs, but, you know, on to the next one. See how I get on those. So, and thank you to everyone who sponsored me and encouraged me every metre of the way. It's much appreciated. So, who listened to the Strangers Hall episode last week? Yeah, you all know the score. Hi, Cass. If you missed it, you know where it is. It's still there. It's on Spreaker. It's on YouTube. Ready for you to listen to. If for some reason you were otherwise occupied last week, as are all the Haunted History shows and all of the Parasearch shows in general. But, you know, as you're listening to Haunted Histories now, I would hope that you're going to listen to those ones first. Thanks, Carly, and I'm sorry to read that. I am sorry to read that. If you want to message me about any charities that might be able to help you out, please do so, because it is something I deal with on a daily basis. Anyway, so Strangers, well, do have a listen to it. This place, Strangers Hall, has seriously been one of the most active I think I've ever visited. Subtly active, you know, there weren't things flying off walls and all of that. Hi, Simon. There weren't things flying off walls or anything sort of, I don't know, poltergeisty, you know, as in the film Poltergeist or any of those sort of stereotypical horror films, but there was a hell of a lot going on, and I think we only touched the surface. So even as a museum, it's somewhere that's well worth a look. If you're ever in Norfolk, if you're ever in that part of the world, go and check it out. So, what else before we get on with the interview? Well, would you believe, hi Kerry, it's actually been 12 months, yep, a whole year since I started the Haunted History show. It's my Haunted Histories anniversary. Congratulations to me, and congratulations to the Parasearch guys for putting up with me as well. The time has absolutely flown by. I can't believe it's a year ago I was sitting sort of listening to my show going out feeling slightly sick, and I think it was the wonderful Kerry G who played it out for me as well. I've got to know some absolutely incredible people who, thank you Carly, who I can now call friends. So thank you, all of you, for being part of this, and thank you for listening, and Long may she reign. Kerry, world domination, remember? Hey, thanks, Kaz. So, talking about Kerry, this isn't Kerry's show, by the way. This isn't, I'm going to talk about Kerry and how wonderful she is. But the competition to win a tarot reading with this lovely lady is still on. If you want to be in for a chance, and you've got to be in it to win it, guys. In it to win it. Go to the Facebook page for Parasearch. Give the competition a like, a share and a comment. And you're entered. It's that easy. What have you got to lose? Seriously, what have you got to lose? I'm sure she'll be nice to you if you win. Well, tonight, I was really rather excited about this show because not only did I get to dig into the history of the fabulous Leap Castle, but I also got to speak to the very, very wonderful and absolutely gorgeously lovely Mr. Barry Fitzgerald. Now, I'll admit, I'm a bit of a sucker for an Irish accent. I'm a bit of a sucker for accents, full stop, and Barry didn't disappoint with his Irish accent. So, without further ado, I'm actually going to play the interview out straight away for you. If that's all right with you guys. Yeah? Okay, hang tight. And on tonight's show of Haunted Histories, we're actually joined by the very lovely Mr. Barry Fitzgerald. Now, Barry is speaking to us all the way from Ireland. So for once we haven't got time differences to worry about like we do with a lot of the guests I get on this show. Barry has been working in the paranormal field for in excess of 30 years. He's a writer. He's written a lot of books, both fiction and non-fiction, I believe. And he was also the lead investigator on Ghost Hunters International, which you've probably caught, which is still playing on various channels over here in the UK, and produced some pretty darned interesting shows that I caught up on. But rather than be sort of wax lyrical about what Barry's done, I'll just hand it over to Barry. Hi Barry, how are you?
Hi Penny, thanks very much for having me on. That was a great introduction there, by the way.
Oh, I'm sure you could have done better. You could have done better. I did read up on your bio though that you started doing work on legend and folklore.
Yes, I have to say, and I really found my footing in that,
yeah,
and thoroughly enjoyed it. But really, that came about because of an incident that I had in Belize, in the Mayan underworld.
Oh wow!
This particular cave complex extended miles back into the mountains. But to get into it, you had to cross 3 rivers and hike into the jungle, and wearing snake gaiters, because you just never knew where these blasted snakes were. And I'm from Ireland. We don't have snakes, thanks to St. Patrick.
I was about to say, the good old St. Patrick got rid of them for you, didn't he?
Which means that we know nothing about snakes. So we had to take all the precautions, and when we arrive at the edge, the mouth of this cave complex, you have to swim in with all your equipment and everything else. And many times the water's over your head, the depth. And by the time we were coming out, we spent three days in there, and by the time we were coming out at night, you just lose all sense of time.
Yeah.
And by the time we were coming out, the mouth of the cave complex was surrounded by these very, very dangerous serpents, and they're nicknamed as one step, and because once they bite, you get one step. That's it, over. Good night.
Wow.
And so we had an experience in there which led to me authoring the book In the Mist of Gods, and that really sparked my interest into the myth and folklore of the world, but more interestingly, of course, within my own heritage here in Ireland.
Well, Ireland's got a lot of those kind of, Irish sort of live on folklore, really, don't they? That's right, and that really steered me into it headlong. Wow. And from that, then I have to say, Penny, that in the 30 odd years of doing the whole ghost hunting and all that type of stuff, I've never had as many experiences in 4 years
myth and legends that I've had in the 30 years of the paranormal.
Really?
And some of those experiences have been so extreme that I've said, if that ever happens again, I'm retiring. I'm finished. I can't do that again.
Wow.
They have been so intense. And so it's been very, very extreme. And certainly friends of mine now who have come across from England, who are also researchers, and I've taken them to these locations that are noted for activity, and they have their experiences. And they're going back to England realizing that we can no longer just accept myths and legends as that.
Yeah.
We have to incorporate them into our understandings now because of the experiences that they took back with them.
So these myths and legends, is it almost a case of you discovered there really is no smoke without fire kind of thing?
That's exactly right, yeah. Uh-huh.
So can you give me an example of sort of quite a simple one that one you've discovered in Ireland?
Yes. Well, we went to this place. It's called Weenagath, and it's called the Cave of the Cats in English. Mm-hmm. And this place was used by the ancient Irish back in history, and it was known as a doorway to the other world, this other place, the world of the gods. But to get into it, you have to descend into the earth, and you have to crawl down through this particular cave entrance, which is already marked out with Ogham, the ancient writings etched along the walls of this cave. Right. To descend down into the underbelly. But it was when we were in there that both myself and my co-author Cormac Strain, we took up positions, and he was standing maybe several feet in front of me. Now bear in mind that this is an absolutely black as your boot cave. So we didn't have any lights on, and suddenly I was starting to see this thing in front of me, and I was saying, what on earth is that? And I thought my eyes were playing tricks, because this particular image was presenting its own light source, and it almost. I'm a big Trek fan, but I remember that there was a movie out there that they had done, and Lieutenant Uhura was dancing on top of a sand dune with leaves in front of her, and she was dancing around very seductively. And I remember looking at this thing in the cave, thinking to myself, why am I thinking of Lieutenant Uhura? And I just panned it, I let it go. I never even mentioned it. And because I thought it was the tricks of my own eyes, and I left that. But we ultimately, inside the cave, we ended up swapping positions. And Cormac came behind me. And within about 5 minutes, Cormac began describing what I was seeing, what I had seen. Right. But what we were able to determine is that what we were seeing was actually in between us, and it was not far in the distance, because it was almost impossible to determine distance and everything else in black environment. But this place, instead of having, Weenagath, of course, had a lot of horror stories about it. But if anything, we had a very, very pleasant experience there, and it's definitely something that for people who have got the mobility, I would definitely advise a trip to Weenagath, to experience some of that. I know that some of the archaeologists had arranged the reproduction of some of the old Celtic horns, and or big brass instrument, or copper instrument of some sort, or could be even bronze for all I know. But they brought these things down into the chamber, and they started to blow the horns, and everything is about vibration. You've got to understand all the Neolithic structures and everything that still dot the landscape. They're all engaged and started with the use of vibration. Our ancestors used this all the time, but down in this particular place in Weenagath, they started to use the Iron Age horns. And one of the archaeologists, he told me on the QT, he brought me to the side and he says, Barry, I don't believe in any of this stuff, but I can't explain what I saw. And I said, why, what did you see? And he said, as soon as the horn started, within seconds, he said, someone was standing in front of me. And he said, it wasn't a case of me thinking that I was seeing someone. I was actually seeing someone. And what was disturbing is that they were able to see me. And he described, being an archaeologist, he understood the history of Ireland and everything else. He said the helmet that they wore was not Irish. He's never seen that before. But he said their eyes were remarkably green. So that was something that stood out for Weena Goth. And it's certainly something that, if you, as I say, if you have the mobility, a lot of these locations are hard to reach, but my goodness, are they worth the hike to get there?
Well, that one you mentioned in Belize, it's not the snakes that would faze me, it's having to go underwater to get in. That would be the thing that would bother me the most. I could cope with the snakes. It's the water bit, but so there must be. I mean, the experience you've just recounted. It's actually quite interesting that we're going to be talking about Leap Castle shortly, and obviously Leap has got the history. It's got the reputation of having an elemental attached to it. What you experienced in those caves, could that be linked to being some kind of an elemental it's their territory?
Well, that's the thing, you see, with dealing with the myths and legends, it was very, very easy for us to see that the stories of old, the stories of our ancestors 100 years ago, even 200 years ago, talked about these beings that haunted the landscape in the twilight. Victorianism took them a stage further, of course, and made them acceptable to the populace, and we call them fairies today. But the she, of which that's what the Irish call them, is she. But she is also denotes the place where they come from.
Right.
And she is also the word for the Neolithic mounds. These doorways that remain from 6,000 years ago, which themselves were known as doorways to the world of the gods.
Right.
And this is where these things they believed came from. The she meaning people of the mountains, and banshee, of course, the old lady who cries for the death of someone. She is woman of the she, woman of the mound. And I gotta say, I hand on heart, I have been in those mountains, and I have seen those things, and I have even photographed those things. They have allowed me to photograph them, and
the she's.
The she, yes.
The she, sorry.
And I can't explain it. I really don't know. The last expedition that I run into those mountains, all of us ended up having the experience of a lifetime. And the reporters over from Wales and everything else, and they had the experiences. And these things came in the wind that night. They came in the worst of the storm. And I have never, ever heard anything just quite like that myself. I've never heard these things move so fast throughout the campsite. And they hit the side of the tent that the reporter was in so hard that it lifted her and sent her 3 feet across the tent to land on her sister.
Wow.
It was sometimes they can be nasty enough now, but the stories of the she, of course, are very prevalent and still very much alive in our landscape today. And not only here, but all around the world, you'll find traces of these things. But the elemental, of course, is said to be part and parcel of the history of Leap Castle. Mildred Darby, of course, who we'll get into later on.
We'll get on to her in a minute. Yeah.
She has. My finger points at Mildred Darby as being the scoundrel here, who may have brought the elemental forward.
Really? Okay. That's one of the things I've got down that we're going to talk about is the reasons for this elemental when it, for want of a better term, does make an appearance. Because there's quite a few different theories as to where he's come from. But or it's come from. So what got you into the paranormal? Because 30 years ago would have meant you were a wee young lad. So, because you're about the same sort of age as me, so a wee young lad, very young, very young, very young.
I think I am, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So you would have been a wee young lad when you got into it. What got you into it?
I think, even going back further than that, I think my father is to blame for that. Because as children, of course, we probably were rowdy and were putting his head away, running around the house screaming and yelling. But over the course of time, he would have set me down in front of the new colour television, and Doctor Who would have been coming on. And surely I was being inspired by tales from the Great Doctor and of course Star Trek.
Which Doctor are we talking about here, though, Barry? Which of the...
Tom Baker.
Oh, good lad. That's my Doctor too. Yeah, you can tell we're the same age. Yeah.
The only Doctor worth its salt.
Isn't it just? Isn't it just? Yeah.
So I think being introduced to the world of sci-fi and imagination, everything then was something which my father put in place. And of course my own heritage. My own heritage lends itself to never being too far away from it. And
the Irish heritage you're talking about.
The Irish heritage, yeah, and that of course inspired me then into the who, what, why, and when. And over the course of time, it just skyrocketed, and that was that.
So, when you were working on GHI, what would you have said was your favourite place that you visited?
Oh my goodness! I do have a soft spot for Argentina.
Right.
I gotta say, because they had absolutely fabulous horse riding there.
Yes.
Nothing to do with the ghosts, but the horse riding was amazing.
The gauchos? Gauchos, do they call
yeah,
them?
Yeah. And the sunsets there were, oh my goodness, they were unbelievable. But I think one of the most memorable experiences that I had was back in Belize again. And we had to go back for a second night of filming. And for some reason I had to go back with the crew. And I don't know why. I can't remember what the reason was now, but the crew had to go back and get their night's filming, and I returned with them, and I was left alone in this jungle setting, and I was standing in the middle of a Mayan city, and in front of me was a temple, and which stretched up through the fauna up into the air. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to go up here and see this because I'll never do this again. And I climbed the steps. No one was around, and I climbed the steps and bust through the forest and up onto the top of the temple. And I lay on my back on top of the temple, looking at the stars as the moon started to come up over the top of the forest. And it was just one of those moments that you realize, I'm never going to do this again.
Yeah.
And I just lived in that moment, and it was absolutely staggering. And if there was a spiritual connection at all possible, that was it. I was certainly having it at that particular time.
See, the funny, you mentioned the Mayans. I actually, there is a link to what I'm about to say. I got married in Mexico. My husband and I got married in Mexico. And being a history nerd that I am, I was sort of like, we've got to go and visit some of the Mayan ruins. And the main one that everyone knows about there is Chichen Itza.
Oh, yes.
And me being a bit of a researcher as well as a history nerd, I started sort of researching, were there any others? Where we actually got married in Tulum, it's not as big as, it's not as well known as Chichen Itza, but there is quite a predominant Mayan ruins, and also nearby a place called Coba. And what was interesting is I was chatting to someone else it was a lady from New York. She was there because she had a paralysed husband, and she would take a week's holiday every year as a break. It sounds awful, but from looking after her husband.
Yes.
Because he was I think he was tetraplegic and brain damaged with it, so it was very stressful looking after him. And she'd been to Chichen Itza, and she said, I didn't like it there. She said, you tell me what you think about it when you go. She said, but I did not like that place. and we went, and it's stunning. And you look at, as you're saying about the Mayan temple, the sort of pyramid temple. I'm reading the blurb and knowing that they used to sacrifice people down there to pay homage to the sun god, and all those. And I think one of the myths there is when the sun hit it, right, there was meant to be a serpent symbol that would come down the steps, and that the cenote that was at the side of Chichen Itza, it's basically a natural pond I think it's in limestone, so it's self-cleaning. They reckon that there's thousands of skeletons at the bottom of it from these sacrifices, but nobody can get down to it because it's so far down. And even before I started reading it, I thought, I don't like this. This place it does not feel nice to me. It doesn't feel like a fun place to be. It is a religious monument for the Mayans. And I met a few Mayan Indians while I was there, and they were absolutely lovely. But then we went to Koba, and Koba's in the jungle. Some of the buildings were very similar, but that was one that my husband, you could go up the temple steps, and he's a roofer by trade, so steep things don't faze him at all. And I sort of said to him, don't like heights, not that confident on steep. I'm going to sit here against this tree and we'll just take it all in. Yes. And it was just you saying about lying on the sort of the top of that temple, that sort of staring at the stars. I didn't realise I'd been sitting there for 3/4 of an hour, because I just felt so at ease and so comfortable and so at peace in this place. But then when I started looking up the history, when I started doing more research, Chichen Itza was where they did all the sacrifices because they wanted rain and everything, but the place is barren. Yet Koba, very fertile, very rich soil, very agricultural, was a very laid back sort of Mayan village. They never sacrificed anyone, they didn't need to. It was very they used to sell their goods, and it was just one of those, you could feel the difference in the places. Yes, but it was just weird. At this one in Koba, I didn't realise I'd been leaning against this tree, just almost like people watching for 45 minutes. It felt like 5.
Funny you should say that. Last year I was in the Yucatan, and I was visiting an ancient city there, Mayan city, and I had just moved into the back plaza, and it was fully covered with trees. But as I moved into the plaza, I picked up on this particular, I suppose I want to call it entity, whatever the case may be, but. It was very, very similar in feeling to what I would experience with the she. So I addressed it in the same way, expecting a response, and it didn't come. So I stepped further into the plaza, and I was very aware of its placement and everything else, and I consorted again, and I was completely ignored. It was like, yeah, see you, but I don't want to talk to you, type of thing. And I thought, how strange, I've never had this happen before. And I continued to try and reach it, and it just did not want to know whatsoever. And I thought, wow. And I was with a group, and within the group there was a 9-month-old baby, and the baby started to cry. And it was then that this particular thing, suddenly the ears pricked up on it. And it moved around me and headed in the direction of the baby. And the two Mexican guides that were there in broken Spanish were able to pick up, in which they said, we need to get the baby and the mother out of here. So something spiritually was going on there. There's something with those forests and still lingers around those particular sites. And I could tell, whatever that was very animalistic. But never experienced that before. It was the only place in the world that I've experienced that.
No, I did find Chichen Itza as being very, very... I visited it because it's like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but I found it very... you could almost smell death. That's the only way I can explain it. And it was funny talking to this New York lady afterwards, and she was actually a nurse by trade, and she said to me, what did you think? And I said, didn't like it. I said to her, it smelled of death. And she goes, that's exactly what I thought when I went there. She goes, I visited it because, it's one of the, it's an amazing place. She said, but I didn't like it. I wouldn't have wanted to spend much time there if I could help it. She said, because she said, I just felt sort of uneasy and that was exactly how I felt. And it's funny, I know other people have been there who are like, no, it's just buildings. But then it's one of the reasons almost that I do this show, because a lot of people don't realise how a history of places do influence those places.
Absolutely.
And the fact that learning about history, yes, it could influence you a bit when you go into an investigation, but that's just one of those things. But how often can you tie in the history to the way a place makes you feel? When I first went to Chichen Itza, I didn't know that much about what had happened there. I didn't know. It was only afterwards I started reading the books, and I was actually back at our hotel complex in the sort of library that they had there, that was telling me about the amount of people who were executed there, and was telling me that, how that one of the platforms that I just looked at and I thought, my husband said, do you want to go over to that? But I was like, oh, no, I don't like that. Was where they used to put the heads on the spikes to show them off. And it's amazing, really, how these places can just hold these energies.
They can.
Forever.
Yeah. And there are certain times of the year that they can get worse than others.
Yeah. So, on to Leap Castle in Offaly, County Offaly, is that correct?
That's
County
it.
Offaly? There's some sort of dispute as to how long the castle's been there, but I know the sort of the history side of it that I've looked into. It does say that there's been something there probably since, well, thousands and thousands of years, really, if not, as far back as history can tell. And in the is it the Annals of the Four Masters, the Chronicles of Irish medieval history, that's got it dating back, hundreds and hundreds of years. But it was built by the O'Bannon clan, who were sort of secondary chieftains to the ruling O'Carroll clan. Well, these tongue twisters. O'Carroll clan. Now, my knowledge of Irish sort of clan history is that it was quite bloody, it was quite aggressive, and life wasn't really valued that highly. Would that be probably a correct?
Well, that's the thing, about Ireland and its history. There's always a lot of bloodshed in it, and every castle in Ireland really has got a bloody story of some sort. But Leap Castle seemed to have more of an abundance, and the old story that stretches back says that the castle of what we know today was built on the blood of one of the chieftains, the O'Bannons, who was asked to jump between the crack in the rocks in which the castle was built, and it seems that he didn't make it. And his blood, of course, went into the foundations.
And that's why it's called Lemmy Van Ann.
And that's why it's called Lemmy Van Ann, Leap of the O'Bannons.
Yeah.
And but this particular castle, when the other guys took it, they seem to have some family issues, and certainly something more than the regular you took my porridge type of thing. And they definitely did have some type of issue, that issues, family issues, daddy issues, I suppose, and that of course struck off a chord in the castle history, and made it into what it is today. Yeah.
Well, if we look at, there's a few different things about the castle I want to look at. Obviously, the chapel being one of them. Mm-hmm. Also, the family, the oubliette is another biggie. But we mentioned. Actually, no. I'll step back a bit. There's been sort of 3 or 4 families, probably say, that have owned the castle in its time. You've got the Darbys, of which Mildred Darby, who we're going to talk about in a bit, the writer, who was probably guilty of inciting some of the stuff that's happened there. You've got obviously the O'Bannons and you've got the O'Carrolls who are very involved, and then probably the family now who owns it, the Ryans. Is it the Ryans?
Yes.
Yeah, who now own it. So it's not actually been owned by that many people, but it has seemed to have suffered quite. It does seem to be a sort of a magnet for shit, to be quite honest, the stuff that's happened to. I can't think of a technical term, but it does seem to be a shit magnet. Yeah, you can swear on my show. That's one of the good things about it. It has an adult content warning. So when we sort of go back to the whole sort of the clan side of it, sort of pre-1600s, you've got the O'Carrolls. Now, one of the places that's mentioned a lot, if you read anything to do with Lep, it's the chapel, or the Bloody Chapel, as it's known. Now, my understanding of this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is one Mulrooney O'Carroll, who died around 1532. There was a bit of a bum fight with the heirs as to who was going to now rule the clan. And there was, and I don't know how you pronounce his first name, Teague. It is Teague, okay. The one-eyed Teague O'Carroll was annoyed that Mass was being celebrated in the chapel by his older brother, Thaddeus, who should apparently have waited for Teague to appear before he started conducting Mass. And Teague, being, I say, a bit annoyed, decided to plunge his sword into the priest, also his older brother. And the priest is now meant to haunt the chapel a lot.
Yes.
What can you add to that?
I gotta say that, you know, I could just imagine to be a fly in the wall at that particular moment when suddenly the sword was plunged into the priestly brother.
Yeah.
Oops! How did that happen?
He fell, Mum. He fell.
There were some suggestions, of course, that he was annoyed that Mass had started before him, but more than likely it was a power play.
Yeah.
And he knew that if the brother was to inherit the castle, well, then all the stuff and all the loot would go to that particular parish, if you like.
He would have donated it to his church, being a priest.
It probably itself would have been converted into a type of monastery.
Right.
And of course, now monasteries back in the day were different. Up until in Ireland, up until I think it was the 12th or 13th century, the monasteries themselves were in themselves power plays. There were seats of power for that particular family, because back in the day for the Monsignor to be running the place, of course, if you're going to donate a lot of money to set this place up, the particular clan would of course suggest who the Monsignor was going to be, which was usually their people, and the internal funding of that was kept to that particular parish and the tribe, of course, as well.
So the clan would have had their finger in that particular pie.
Oh, very much so, very much so.
Is that also where the Irish sort of, one of the things I've sort of seen in Irish history is, and I don't know whether it is just a cliche, is that one of the sons would always become a priest?
That was something that always seemed to stretch through for some bizarre reason. I can never understand why. That maybe is one reason for it. I don't know, but one son would stay back with the farm, and the other with the church, and maybe it was just a way of splitting everything up. It could well have been. I don't know. But that was in the Celtic, that style of ruling certainly was the Celtic church, and that came to an end just after the 1200s.
Right.
when Rome finally stamped down its authority and said, no, no more, they moved in and took everything over.
Right.
So Teague, of course, I would say was making a power play, and keeping the name and the castle and the lands and the money and everything else, keeping it within the family, and he had to go. So I think that was the dastardly deed that was committed, and of course the brother fell over the altar, and that was that. So
I presume you've been to the chapel.
I have many times.
Yep. Yeah. What experiences have you had there? I like that little wry giggle then.
The chapel itself is also the doorway to the oubliette, and oubliette, of course, meaning small room of forgetting. But you've got the four windows, north, south, east, and west, within the castle. Now, whenever Sean took over the castle, and he moved in, Sean Ryan, back in the early 1990s, I believe, he bought the castle, and conversion started, and he was having a horrible time with the spirits there, and any work that he was trying to do was ending in disaster, to the point where he even broke his legs. Wow. And so the deal was done with the spirits that they would leave the top of the castle open, as in the windows. They wouldn't seal the windows.
Yeah.
And that was done, and peace pretty much reigned. But yes, the brother has been seen up there on multiple occasions, and I got to say that whenever we started filming for Ghost Hunters in the castle, one of the guys, the guy who was responsible for setting up the equipment, he had just come in from America, and I was there, and he set everything up, and I said, okay, are we ready? And he said, yes. And I said, now before you flick the switch, you definitely have set your equipment to the European power supplies. And he said, oh yeah, everything's ready to go. And I said, are you sure? Yes, it's all grand, it's all good. And he pushed the plug in, and all of a sudden, boom, and the power went out to the castle, and he blew up the cameras and everything else, because he didn't step up. He needed to step up for 220 volt,
right.
Where Americans use 110.
Right.
And he looked at me in the dark, and I switched on the flashlight, and I said, now you're in its territory. And that led to a great night's investigation, which of course included the chapel, because Dustin was up on top of the chapel whenever he was hit and knocked to his back on the floor. And you've got to have respect for things in LEP. Yeah. And this is the tricky situation that the Ryan family are in that they do allow investigators in, but the investigators got to remember this is a home.
They have to live there after the investigators have gone. Yeah.
After they're gone, they got to pick up the pieces. So you got to find a way of investigating LEP Castle, which number one isn't going to harm you, and number two isn't going to have any long-term effects on the Ryan family either.
Definitely. You don't want to go in and antagonise. Be respectful. No, I agree. It's, at the end of the day, it's the spirit's home as well. And you go in there and you start spouting off and yelling at them and everything else. So it's akin to going into someone's house and doing the same thing. But that's something I always address as well with EVP, because there are very rare occasions that I would get quite forceful with during an EVP session. Most times I'm very respectful, because if we picture it in a setting. Today, for instance, where we're walking along the street and we've got a dictaphone in our hand, and we jam it in someone's face saying, "What's your name? How long have you been here?" And things like that. What's that person going to do? They're going to actually step around you thinking you're probably insane, and either walk around you or turn and walk the other direction without saying a single word. Now, if you're more respectful,
and you say, "Excuse me,
Hi, my name's Penny.
There. Yeah, I would like to ask you a few questions, if that's okay." And you're more likely to get a response that way than the forceful way.
Mm. Yeah, no, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. It surprises me actually how sometimes people sort of they treat spirit as though they're just there to be performing monkeys. And either they expect sort of literally I've walked in the room now, come on, start, or they're asking the most banal questions that you think, just chat to them as though they're a normal. I will go and introduce myself to someone. Hi, I'm Penny. Pleased to meet you. Can you tell me your name? Or what's your name? Can you let me know who I'm talking to? That kind of thing. And it's just manners, really. But
well, I know further up the road from Lep Castle, there's Kennedy Castle.
Right.
And Kennedy Castle, I was in Kennedy Castle one particular evening. I was running a recording session there, and there was a group who arrived up who had been to Kennedy Castle many times, asking the same questions in EVP sessions time and time again. And in the recording, strangely enough, I find it remarkable that in the recording, as they're approaching the castle, you can hear a woman's voice in the room saying, "Not these people again."
Awesome. Awesome.
So you gotta have the respect and change the questions from time to time.
Exactly. One of my things is I like to crack a joke with spirits.
Yeah.
I like to try and make them laugh, because as far as I'm concerned, if they were people, and people have a sense of humour, and sometimes people think I'm mad when I'm sort of cracking a joke or something, and it's like, well, why shouldn't I? I remember I was using a spirit board at a nuclear bunker, and this young soldier had come through. He seemed to have a bit of a thing for me, and somebody had said, "Oh, do you want us to get all the other women in the group down here?" And he sort of shot the thing to yes. And I sort of said, "Oh, Matthew, you're trying to make me jealous." And I'm not joking, the glass shook as it went to yes, as though he was laughing. And they were like, "Why did you ask that?" I said, "It's the sort of thing I'd say if he was sitting in front of me now. If it was a sort of a visible human, I'd say that to them. So why wouldn't I say it now?" It's you know, you don't have to be anything other than how you would be normally. It's just be yourself, and if you want to ask a slightly out there question, ask it, because it's a bit like, I always think it's a bit like when actors and that have to do those press junkets. They get asked the same thing over and over again, and you can always see an interview. And I say Alison Hammond off This Morning is brilliant for doing this, asking left of field questions that you can see the actor going, "Wow, honestly, no one's ever asked me that before." But they remember her because of that, because she thinks outside of the box. And I agree with you. Yeah. So we got the chapel. Is the brother, is Thaddeus, how it's pronounced, is he a friendly spirit, or is he a bit annoyed that he was killed?
He's a controlling spirit. He definitely has influence on the activity within the castle, and a calming influence at that.
So he's almost like a patriarchal figure for the castle. Okay. Well, as you've already mentioned, let's go on to the oubliette next, which they fascinate me, oubliettes. But the oubliette at Lep is pretty nasty in the fact that it's got wooden spikes, or had wooden spikes at the bottom of it, and that basically, from my understanding, I've seen oubliettes before, I've not been to the one at Lep, but that basically had a hidden trap door that would you'd be standing over it, the door would go, you'd fall onto the spikes, die quite a painful, not necessarily instant death. And when in 1922 they were one of the castle refurbs, which was following it being burnt during the Irish Civil War,
1821.
They discovered something like 3 cartloads
of
human bones. Still some of them embedded on these spikes.
Yeah.
Now, that alone is pretty not nice, really. The thought of and how many tortured spirits, tortured souls, must have been trapped there.
Yeah, you have a little prison cell just a little further down, the floor underneath that. If you were in there, you're fine. You were going to live. But if you were taken to the oubliette, which is in the chapel, ironically enough, you're destined to end your days there. And some of the things were done. They were pretty horrific. As you pointed out, there were spikes at the bottom. At the minute, it's pretty much just about half filled with old bird nests and things like that. So it's filling back up again. But back in the day, what tended to happen is that there were slits in the wall. So when you were put into the oubliette, yes, you were going to fall onto the spikes and puncture your lungs, or one of your lungs at least, and you would have got access to view the dining hall below. So you could have you would have been there watching people and everything else, and you would have starved to death if you weren't going to die from your wounds. So it was a nasty place, a nasty way to go. But I believe there was also the rumor as well that they found a pocket watch in one of the rib cages of the bodies that were found down in the oubliette during the clearing in 1922. Now, there were some stories there that would suggest that it was still being used. That was probably not necessarily the case. It was more than likely one of the watches from one of the guys that was cleaning it out had just out of his pocket and dropped down into it. That's probably more likely a truth to the matter. But the oubliette was a very nasty place, and of course, the O'Carrolls, the O'Carroll clan, which came originally from the northern borders, they had a falling out with people up there, as was the way within the north, and they moved down and of course took on the O'Banions and won. So they got the castle, but they also kept their links to the northern tribes as well, and one of them had connections to an O'Neill lineage, which was one of the tribes up there, and they were invited down for a peace banquet. And I can never understand these terms, peace banquets, because maybe I'm just too suspicious a person. But, when someone says that to me, I ain't going anywhere. But these people did, and what happened allegedly is that they were poisoned, their throats were slit, and a lot of them were dragged upstairs and thrown into the oubliette, and some of them were exposed of other ways, but there was something like there was over 20 that particular night that were assassinated over the table. It was like a scene from Game of Thrones, and that of course was some of the bones that ended up in the oubliette.
Well, I mean, one of the other stories I read about the O'Carrolls was that they employed a northern sort of tribe, the McMahons, I think it was the McMahons, to teach them some new warfare methods so that they could beat one of their rivals. Which the McMahon tribe did, and they successfully beat these rivals of the O'Carrolls, and there was about 40 of them, and they came to it for a victory feast at Lep, and they were poisoned, and supposedly some of their members still haunt the castle. Because they were a bit annoyed that to get out of paying their bill for teaching them these new warfare things, they were just murdered instead. So it does. I mean, when you sort of you read that it says it was a castle built and fueled by blood and death. It really doesn't. That's what I say. It's a ship magnet. It really does seem to have attracted it. What with being burnt down during the Irish Civil War as well, and so around the oubliette area, you say it's in the chapel.
Yes.
Does it have that kind of ominous, dark kind of feeling to it?
Believe it or not, it actually doesn't.
Really?
Yeah, surprisingly, it doesn't. And if anything, I find the staircase up to it more disturbing than the actual oubliette itself.
Okay.
There's a darkness on the staircase which is quite hard to pass through, and that has a troubling aspect to it.
So do the Ryans avoid this part of the castle?
They tend to let it be. Yeah. It's pretty much left to its own devices. The windows are open. It's a stone floor with some straw on it. And there's access to the battlements there as well. Mm-hmm. See, one of the children, which you may be touching on later, but one of the children fell from the battlements,
right,
and was killed. Now the big question is: did she fall herself, or was she pushed? And that was never suitably answered. But I know that Leppin itself now, like Sean has uncovered a secret room, the armory, which he calls it now, and there were also bodies found in the walls and things like that. So that were uncovered. So there are a lot of things that was going on, and people went insane in the castle, and there was buried treasure and all that stuff. Wow. So yeah, there's a lot of stories about it.
So what experience have you had on this staircase then?
There's a little place off the staircase which would have took you across the old ramparts. Mm-hmm. And I had a medium there once, and she had a very, very intense time. It took a long time to get her to settle, because she described a scene of a lady who was raped on that particular battlement, and she went into detail about what happened. It was very graphic for her. They broke her arm and everything else, and that was also the place that I encountered this if you like. And I was, of course, they say that you should leave sleeping dogs lie, but at that particular time I was experimenting with several new pieces of equipment, and I had the stick in my hand, and I began to poke the dog, and I got my ass kicked. So, these are things that happen within Leap Castle, and I have a new appreciation for years now of Leap Castle. And I'll give you an example of how Leap Castle can affect you. I brought a team of Americans down with me to the castle itself. And I had arranged with Sean that they were going to have an investigation and this and that. And what ultimately ended up happening is that Sean got his dates mixed up, and he was off playing a gig. When we arrived at the castle was black. There was no one there. And I had to apologise to the American crowd that were there. And I says, look, while we've come this far, have a look around. And in the meantime, I stayed up by the bus, and I seen them moving around. Now, I seen them also taking out an ultraviolet light, and that's why I got my ass kicked in Leap Castle by the elemental, because I was using ultraviolet light, and knew that can kick off a situation. So I asked the guys not to use their ultraviolet light. I shouted down to them, and they heeded it, and everything was grand. And we started to head off, and we all climbed back in the bus, and we started to drive off. Now, as soon as we got to the bottom corner, confusion began to hit, because the driver was getting so confused, and I'd been there many times, and he knew the road like the back of his hand. Yet, although his eyes were telling him the road goes to the left, he wanted to go to the right, which would have created a situation because we would have ended up careering off the road. And but he stayed true, and he followed his senses, but we ended up being lost. We ended up lost on a bog road. Couldn't understand what was going on. There was utter confusion, and And I turned around to two guys that were sitting beside me. And I says, guys, just wait here. I just need to step outside. And I opened the bus door and stepped outside and just waited. Found out what was going on. Why is this happening? And I got back into the bus and I looked at the two guys and I says, guys, you see the stones that you have in your pockets from Lep Castle? Throw them out the window. And they looked at me stunned that I actually knew that they had stones in their pockets. And everybody else in the bus was shocked as well that they had done this. And they threw the stones out the window. Now, we closed the door of the bus and the bus driver started to drive off and I said, stop. And we stopped again and I said, guys, you need to throw the rest of them out as well. And again, they were surprised and they threw the rest of the rocks in their pockets out onto the side of the road. And when we got to the end of that road, we discovered that we were doing a horseshoe. We left the castle, but the castle was bringing us back again. We were doing just a circle and coming back on ourselves. But that is how the castle can affect you in ways that you least expect. And I can tell you that its reach is it's really far-reaching. So I have an ultimate respect for Lep and what's in it.
Okay, that's an interesting one. So because they had remnants of the castle in their pockets, it wouldn't let you leave.
Yeah, they ended up doing it, and strangely enough, I've come across other accounts. Sean actually put me in contact with a person who had, during the fire of 1921, that they had furniture from the castle that belonged to the castle, and their house was plagued terribly by this, and the only way around it really was to give the furniture back. But I don't know what ever came of that. And strangely enough, there was another person I was talking to from England, and they had been to the castle. And they had a great time, and Sean was very, very hospitable and everything else. And they left in the car and they were driving back when she realized she had one of the mugs in the car from the castle, and the same thing happened to her. She was being brought around in a horseshoe, and she couldn't understand the confusion of what was actually happening, and so she had to address the mug and leaving it back. But it's a strange thing. I've come across that phenomena in other places around the world as well. But Lep is one of those places. Leave things alone. It's okay to go and look, but don't take anything.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that does bring us into the last thing I want to talk about that we did allude to at the beginning, the elemental that's meant to be sort of reside at the castle. Yeah. Now, you mentioned Mildred Darby, and obviously the Darbys were one of the families that took over the castle in the mid-1600s.
That's right.
And interestingly enough, actually, I like it when I find links with the shows I've done. Last week I talked about a place in Norwich, in Norfolk, called Strangers' Hall. And interestingly enough, one of the Darbys was a Vice Admiral, George Darby.
That's right.
And his ship was the HMS Norwich. There you go. I just thought that was an interesting link to the fact I talked about Norwich last week. I didn't plan any of this. This is all just sort of coincidences. Anyway, Mildred was a bit of she was a writer of Gothic novels in her day, I understand. But she also liked doing things like automatic writing, seances, and dabbling with the occult. To put it politely. Now, she's one of the people who's blamed for, shall we say, creating or summoning this elemental. But there are other things that I read. One of them was that it was a druid influence from before the castle was actually built, when the site itself was still sort of a druid site of worship. Another one which I thought was very interesting was it was an invading force summoned the elemental to try and destroy the castle from within. I thought that's quite an interesting. I've never heard that one before. And the other one was it was actually one of the O'Carrolls who actually died from leprosy, which is why there's meant to be a real stench whenever the elemental is said to be present. Now, my understanding of elementals is they're not normally a person. They are something above a person. So the Okara one, I think it's just a nice way of sort of trying to, for the human brain to make 1 and 1 equal 2, almost, to say it was a person who died there. You blame Mildred, don't you?
I do. Now, of course, you mentioned the invading force there before, which was one of my own ancestors, and he was known as the Wizard Earl. Now, the thing is about elementals. Elementals just don't appear; they're summoned, and you got to know what the hell you're doing when you summon an elemental, and especially one such as this, which is a fire elemental. They're exceptionally temperamental. And I do know of cases where people have summoned these things in, and they themselves have been lifted off the floor and beaten off the ceilings, and the floors of the building cracked because of what they were releasing. They're sometimes it's almost impossible to try and control these particular things. And we think that we can control them, but even Aleister Crowley, whenever he was out in Egypt, he decided to summon one of these. It was a lineage to one of these particular things, and he developed his circle and all his protection and everything else. And when this thing finally came forward, it stepped through his defenses, his protective circle, and the living hell out of him. So what we think we know, the safety that the comfort that we take in the way that we summon things sometimes is not actually based in any matter of fact. It's faith, and certainly for the Wizard Earl, the castle was held under siege. I believe his name was Garrett Fitzgerald, and eventually he died in the Tower of London. But it is believed that there was the possibility that was put in there that he had sent in the elemental, but as the castle stood intact, that likely wouldn't have been the case, because the elemental will burn the building from the inside out. And of course that's what ultimately happened. Although it wasn't the elemental did it, it was the IRA that did 1921.
But could the elemental have influenced them to do it?
Well, no, that's the thing. Certainly by that particular stage, Mildred Darby was already there. And Mildred, of course, was having her seances. She was practicing some of the arts within the castle, much to her husband's disdain. He was a supporter of any of this, and that's why Mildred wrote in the magazine under an alias, because her husband didn't want anyone else knowing that his wife was dabbling in this stuff. So Mildred wrote, and I have a copy here somewhere, so I'm looking for it today, in which she writes about the article in which she talks about Lep Castle, and she mentions that they are legion. And that to me, I remember being suspicious at that, and I said, Mildred, you're dabbling in more than what you're letting on. I started looking at when accounts of when this elemental started coming forward, and there weren't accounts back in the day. What I was getting was accounts from when Mildred was at the castle, and I strongly believe that Mildred was responsible for this. And like most things, when they were summoned, she didn't know what on earth she was going to do with them. Because summon them, but my God, it is hard to get rid of them. And so that was the case. Now, what tended to happen in Ireland at that particular time, leading up to 1921, is that when you get a caller that comes to your door at night, it was almost law that you had to offer them bedding,
right,
for the night, and then they travelled on the next day. So in 1921, the knock came to the door. Mildred and her husband, of course, were out of the country at that particular stage. They were in, I believe they were back in England at that point, visiting. And the knock came to the door, and the butler answered the door, and it turned out it was the IRA, and they told them they had 20 minutes, I think it was, that they had to clear out, and they were going to burn the place. And that's how some of the furniture got out. It was stored in the side sheds and everything else, and then it was stolen from there. But the guys set fire to the castle. They set fire to the wings of the castle, and they were burned, just utterly destroyed. And then they came back because the tower was in one piece, and they came back with TNT, and they wanted to blow up the tower. And it turns out that when they went into the basement, they found the wine, and it seems that they were too intoxicated by the time it came to lighting the TNT that they left, fearing that they might blow themselves up. And that is actually how the tower is still standing today, because they got absolutely poleaxed, and that was it. Afraid to let off the dynamite. And the castle survived, and leaving behind, of course, the elemental and every other spirit that was attached to the place.
So, I mean, some of the stories I've read of this elemental is that it does seem to be quite quiet at the moment.
Yes,
it seems to be sort of. Is that because it feels there's no threat to the castle?
It's not so much that it's a threat to the castle as the fact that you don't annoy it.
Okay.
That's pretty much the elemental. It's summed up in one particular line: "Let sleeping dogs lie."
Okay.
I learned that. Yeah, it's not so much about guarding the castle; it's just the fact of leave me alone type of thing.
So,
and if you leave it alone, it'll be left alone. Or if you leave it alone, it'll leave you alone, and you can have a wonderful experience at the castle.
So, what do you need to be careful not to do then to awaken it?
Use ultraviolet light.
Literally that simple.
That's that simple. Don't use ultraviolet light, because that can affect the bonds of manifestation, and can actually break them down. And when you find, you see, to understand the lighting frequencies, we find that there are two different types of spirit that form within the outer edges of what we appreciate this world to be. And we interpret this world through the purples and the reds. And within that spectrum, you've got red, green, blue, all the colors, which are beautiful, and that's how we interpret the world. But on the outer edges of that, there's a fringe that can be manipulated, and children have a greater appreciation of the spectrum than as adults do. So when a child says to us, "Mom, Dad, I'm seeing something in my bedroom," and we go in as adults and look, and there's nothing there, we can't see it, so we give them milk and cookies and send them back to bed. The fact of the matter is, the child can see a greater band of the spectrum than we can as adults.
Yeah.
So there may actually be something there that we have forgotten how to see, because there's a filter thickens over the eye between the ages of 7 and 13, which for most narrows our perspective of that spectrum.
See, it's interesting you say that, actually, Barry, because I'm going through that a lot with my 4-year-old at the moment.
Yes.
But I do know that both my children sense things.
Yes.
And see things. Now, I've always thought it's because of the fact that I've never told them it doesn't exist. I've already said, just be polite like you would be to anyone. It's fine. They're not, because I don't feel, if I felt something threatening around them, I'd be dealing with it quite damn quickly.
Yeah.
But I'm not one of those, whereas children tend to get told, no, ghosts don't exist. Don't worry, it's not real. It's not there. So as their brain develops, they start to go, oh well, it's not there, and they stop processing that information. But because young children don't, they still believe in Father Christmas and the Tooth Fairy and everything else. They've still got that ability to. Now, I always thought it was that made them see it.
Yeah.
But you're
yeah.
saying that their eye changes the
There-
spectrums that
yeah.
it sees in.
Yeah, there can be actually biological changes as to why they're possibly seeing it. And I developed camera technology to almost mimic that of the child's eye. And I got to say, what we started recording was phenomenal.
Interesting.
But anyway, from that particular perspective, you have opposing sides within that spectrum. So elements that are coming through the higher frequency, which is ultraviolet, is opposed by infrared light. Infrared light burns the manifestation of a positive spirit, whereas on the other hand, ultraviolet light burns the manifestation of a negative. So we're seeing that the ultraviolet annoys and forgive my English, pisses off the elemental. So we understand which side of the spectrum it's coming from. Certainly from the old seance rooms, the old Victorian seance rooms, they used red light a lot of the times because they found it easier for spirit to manifest. Well, red actually is closer to the infrared spectrum, where you tend to get the negative spirits coming from, and also a great field of deceit. So when the old stories of test the spirit that it is of God is very, very true. It is something that we need to check all the time, and we can't accept the first thing that comes along. But the ultraviolet light, of course, back to the elemental. Ultraviolet light really pisses off the elemental, and that's what kicks it into activity. And that activity is targeted directly at the person who is carrying the ultraviolet light.
Oh, so it's not everyone who gets it; it's just that one person.
Just that one person. Yeah.
Nice.
Okay.
And
what it can do, I've come across similar entities in other places, and what it can do is affect the atmospheric pressure, the localized atmospheric pressure of say a room. Mm-hmm. And what that does is has a biological effect on ourselves.
Yes.
And that can reduce our blood pressure if it continues. And you usually have about 20 minutes to get the hell out of there. So
I think I did actually read that in one of the notes. It was something called it can trigger a condition called serotonin hyperfunction syndrome. That causes things like heart palpitations, nausea, vomiting, sweating, chills, all of those kind of things, and the ability to alter the atmospheric pressure. Actually, it's a biological condition that they actually believe now that yes, it happened to Mildred Darby a few times by the way she described about, say, the hairs on her scalp standing on edge.
And what can happen if that continues? If that process continues, it can actually drive you into total circulatory collapse. Effectively, you die of a heart attack, and there's no trace.
Wow!
I came across one of those in France, and he was a nasty bugger.
Yeah.
But 20 minutes we had to get out, and 20 minutes it took.
Wow! Just makes you realise how much out there is that we may never know anything about.
Huge amounts out there, yeah.
So, just to close out the interview, Barry, if anyone, what advice would you give to anyone who's lucky enough to go and visit LEP? To have a good visit, a risk-free visit?
Bring Sean a few bottles of wine, and as we say, be full of the crack. In other words, have a great time, and you will come away from LEP having a great experience.
And don't take a UV light with you.
And don't take a UV light with you, and don't take anything from the castle. And you'll be absolutely grand.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, thank you. I could have talked to you for hours.
Thank you,
Barry. You're fascinating. I might have to talk to you again because some of the stuff you were telling me, I'm eager to ask you more, if I'm completely honest. But thank you so much for your time. What have you got coming up then over the next few months?
Well, I'm flying out to Palm Springs to deliver a lecture on the three-fingered alien mummies that were discovered in Peru.
That's a hard life, Palm Springs.
It's someone's got to do it.
God, you're taking one for the team there.
and I'm coming across to the Awakenings in Manchester, and I'll be lecturing there on the ancient Irish doorways to the world of the gods and how they were activated, and more to the point, what lies in wait once you cross the doorway.
And these are the cave you were telling me about. The
just
White
like
Wienergarth, was it called?
Yep, Wienergarth. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And we'll be talking about all things serpent and reptilian at the Awakenings event in Manchester then in June.
Okay. Well, like I say, thank you so much for being our guest tonight. I've learnt so much. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you, and I really do appreciate your time. Barry has got his own website that you can go and have a look on. He's written loads of stuff, and like I say, our very own Kerry Greenaway is a big fan of Barry's work, and she's actually got one she's going to lend to me next time I see her. So I'm sure I'll become a fan of his written work too, and go all a bit fangirly and ask for autographs and things. But all that leaves me to say is, don't forget, Parasearch has shows on every single night of the week. And if you want to catch up on any that you've not been able to listen to live, all you have to do is go over to YouTube and Spreaker. They're all on there ready for you to listen to. But really, all that really leaves me to say is good evening, sleep tight, and don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.